Good morning. This is a sermon for Trinity Sunday and in remembrance of George, Floyd and others. Last week I began reading a book called White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, subtitled Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism. I found myself twitching and rebelling against what I was reading, but Lucy, my bride, kept encouraging me and explaining what was happening. I was reading this book because everywhere the news was about another black man killed by white police. The televised torture murder of a man accused of possibly forging a bill in a corner store. I watched a handcuffed man who had committed no great crime held to the ground by a police officer's knee on his neck. "I can't breathe," he pleaded with urgency and panic in his voice. 3 other officers lounged against the cruiser. They could hear and they could see. I'm not sure what the officer was doing all the 9 minutes of George Floyd's execution, but I think he was filling in a form. I may be wrong, but the dying man was not fighting back, was not armed. What was his offence? Maybe trying to use counterfeit money. Maybe he resisted arrest. Maybe he was afraid of arrest, afraid because he knew he had done something more in resisting, in trying to talk his way out. He had tried to pretend that he was a person, that the officer was a person. But the officer knew the truth. The black man had tried to get above the system and he had to be knocked down. He was not equal to the police officer, not equal to a white man. His crime was crossing the inequality boundary. He was not the equal of a police officer, not the equal of a white man. His crime was regarding himself as a human being. And that subversion must be punished, finally, clearly, and publicly. The other officers made no attempt at all to conceal what was happening. It was a public demonstration of what happens when a black man crosses a white line. I'm not going to go any further into the structure of racism in the United States or guess more about what happened, but I have one more memory that has come to my mind. Early in our arrival in North America, more than 30 years ago, having landed in New York, an American friend met us and we stayed with his family for a while. One day he took us into New York City. I had never seen, traveling in Europe or anywhere else, I'd never seen such poverty and desperation on the streets. Dan pointed to a car cruising, looking for a parking place near a hotel. The driver was black. A police officer on the sidewalk caught his eye. The officer slapped his gun holster. The car accelerated away. What had just happened? Dan said that the officer didn't want black men parking their cars around here. I was jaw-dropped, amazed. It's easy for Canadians to look over the border and shake their heads, and yes, I am glad I live here. However, I remember standing by the grave of a teenage boy at whose funeral I had officiated. His parents were in tears. His sister, in fury, strode towards the group of his friends who had hung back, and she harangued them. She gave them a tongue lashing. Later I went to talk with them, to thank them for coming to a place where they knew they would be in trouble. The boy died of gunshot wounds in a gang face-off. Black. Why might you carry a gun? Think about it. I might carry a gun if I was very scared, if I felt I needed a gun to be counted equal, if I felt afraid when I went out alone, afraid because I am black and black people get attacked and nobody trusts them anyway. I would carry a gun if I felt I needed it to make myself feel equal. I might carry a gun if I felt there was no way up for me except this route. It's hard for me to imagine my way into this mind because I have always felt safe. I have lived with tough schools to go to, but I was a good kid and I had the teacher's approval. My parents had a house and enough food and a car and money for a vacation. And this is how it should be. It should be like this for the boy in Scarborough. It should have been like this for Mr. Floyd. And this is where I get onto shaky ground because I'm saying that the life I live is what everyone should live, which roughly translates into being white and privileged is where it's at. And why aren't you all trying to be like that? And suddenly, with the best will in the world, I am falling into the unconscious racism of a member of a happy and well-supported section of society who thinks that my parents and then I worked for this and I deserve it. It can so quickly descend into, and if those people stop carrying guns and robbing stores, blah, blah, blah. But what about the man out jogging in a white neighbourhood who was shot to death by a retired police chief and his son? Just jogging in a white neighbourhood because he looked like a suspected felon, or maybe, just maybe, because a black man should not be jogging in a white neighbourhood. I would not get shot. I'm white. I could jog there. I feel my pulse rising as I write this because this is stuff I avoid thinking about. I don't want to look at this perhaps because I have white fragility. I have the desire to believe that my way of life is just normal. It's just a given thing. God gave me this because I worked hard at school and I didn't goof off. I steered clear of the bad crowd. I did this and that and the other, and so I deserve the rewards. And I give thanks to God. And I have to admit, yes, I do actually think just like that. Then every now and then God smacks me on the back of the head and says, no, you don't deserve it. Do I know what I would do if doors were closed to me at school? If I was not expected to do well because, well, look at my parents and those kind of kids never do well. Or I was excluded from the smart kids or the in crowd because of the colour of my skin. In a school you need a crowd, you need to belong. And there were times when I did belong to the easiest groups, but the teachers pulled me out. My schools were English and not colour-coded, but they were class-coded, and it's close to the same set of doors that open or close, not because of who you are, but what you are. So who does God see? We see skin, we see clothing worn that tells of the group a person wants to identify with. We hear the speech pattern, the accent, the vocabulary, the way the sentence ends. We watch the body movements. Maybe it's me. Maybe my family moved so often that I went to so many schools. I had to learn to read the language and find the safe group for me, and I had to find my people fast. So I know that when someone from the lower group crosses the boundary to the higher group, then that boundary must be enforced. We might say the shopkeeper was being defended from more and worse attempts at theft. Or we might say, you are the wrong person in the wrong place and now I'm going to teach you and your kind a lesson. Perhaps that's what happened. There was no attempt to conceal from view the cruelty and the deadly violence so casually administered by the police officer. It was a public show. The officers allowed the cameras to roll. What is this to do with Trinity Sunday, other than coincidence? Let's consider our desire to find God. Orthodoxy of Judaism taught that God was one, Yahweh, I am who I am. This was the God of life and death, of mercy and severity, and to be feared by those who sinned. This is the God shared also by Islam and Christianity, the God of laws and commandments. But the God of the Trinity that we meet in Christianity is different, a different being. You will find God in authority, power, and judgment. You will find God in the face of Jesus, the wandering teacher, healer, the overturner of injustice, prejudice, and exclusion. You will find God in the silent whisper of prayer within your heart, the God who comes seeking you at your worst and darkest times of anger and fear and loss. The Spirit who is blind to colour, gender and age, education, and looks only at your ability to love. God was with Jesus, who was crucified, not least because he wouldn't bow to the injustices and prejudices of his world. He too was brutalized by the police. He too died because he could not breathe. He would not stay in his place. It needed to be shown. Our teaching in the church is that God dwells often in the lowest places. The holy word may come from a broken man begging on a corner. The gentleness and compassion of Christ I have seen offered by the broken to the broken more often than anywhere else. Some years ago, a friend visiting Toronto saw the foot care clinic at the cathedral downtown. She saw someone put a towel on their knee as they knelt before a battered street dweller and wash his feet and wipe them clean with such care that my friend, a Christian, was moved to tears. The Spirit was in that mess and glory. Jesus was there. The doctrine of the Trinity says God is in heaven, is in the air like mist, is in human form as a servant without status. And I may have told you this before. A priest I know stepped outside of a synod meeting to have a smoke. A beggar was there. My friend offered him a cigarette and sat beside him on the sidewalk to smoke and to chat. One question he asked the man was, "What's the worst thing about putting your hand out and asking for change?" He said, "Not being seen, being invisible. It hurts." We who are comfortable are rarely hurt, but many are hurt. People of colour are regularly hurt. Things are assumed, judgments are made, eye contact is avoided. Sometimes because I don't know what to say, sometimes because I feel so fragile, so uncomfortable out of my cosseted community, so hurrying to move on and to forget. But does not Jesus look first to stand with the lost, the lonely, the left behind? Was he not counted among sinners? Was he not defended by those without power who were busy on the Friday morning? He was not defended by those with power who were busy on a Friday morning. He had so much to do in the temple. Some people had to do dusting. Some people had to straighten pictures, picking up the thrown down coins, making themselves feel safe again, now that that disturbing preacher had been kindly removed with his disruptive and unfortunate behaviour. What danger am I in? I who am so comfortable and so secure. The lives that do not matter, I do not see. My danger is that Christ might wait for me on a street corner, and I would walk straight past, enclosed in my privilege, unknowingly imprisoned in the walls that keep out the trinity of costly, passionate love. Amen.